Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're a bit light on the ground today. I think the rain dissuaded everyone. So, but it's lovely to be in the room with all of you today and with our friends who have joined online.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Aujourd'hui, si vous souhaitez la traduction en français, on vous suggère de vous connecter au Zoom et de choisir le petit icône de traduction et de conserver votre connexion avec vos écouteurs et votre cellulaire tout au long de la présentation pour éviter des feedback loops.
Thank you. So on behalf of the Office of Public Affairs of the United Kingdom and Canada and the Bahá'í International Community, the Government of Canada and the Government Office of Equalities and Opportunities of the United Kingdom, we're delighted to welcome you to the dialogue, Reconceptualizing Justice at Work, Structural and Cultural Transformations. My name is Shada Tanhai. My colleagues Rebecca Vachon and Esther Maloney and I are pleased to welcome you here today. And we would really like to express our sincere appreciation to the Government of Canada and the United Kingdom for co-sponsoring this event and for their ongoing commitment to advancing gender equality.
Last year, I've learned that Manhattan is the Lenape word for hilly place, and that hills are considered sacred places of refuge, places where the natural and spiritual worlds intertwine. And this reminds me that under New York's busyness, noisiness, that under the busyness and craziness of New York, we can try to reconnect to the land. We can stop and take a breath and just reconnect, push our feet on the ground and try to see that this land is supporting us and connecting us to the people of the past and of the present and the people that are to come. And that we are here, gathered here today, trying to connect with one another, trying to reconnect with the purpose of why we are running around here during CSW. Why are we here? And I think that when we reconnect to the purpose of CSW, we can see that this Lenape teaching tells us that we always have to remember the land and to remember the people of this land and to remember that we are all connected together, that there is a web of relationship connecting us to the nature, to the environment around us, and to one another, to the people of the earth. So I invite us today to connect to this teaching of the Lenape people in engaging in this conversation.
So one question that continues to emerge in many of the conversations taking place during the Commission this year is how to ensure that progress made towards gender equality is sustainable and lasting. A common concern being raised is that despite advances in laws and policies, progress is increasingly met with growing resistance, pushback, and backlash around the world. What this reveals is that lasting transformation requires changes at all levels of society, from its institutional structures, but also to individual hearts and minds. From the perspective of the Baha'i faith, the purpose of justice is the establishment of unity amongst humanity. Justice is considered both as a spiritual quality, guiding individual perception and conduct, as well as a social principle, shaping institutions and governments. Its aim is to ensure that all members of society can participate meaningfully in collective life.
If the gains achieved through legislation are to endure, they must be supported by the emergence of new social norms and by deeper transformation at all levels of society, and from families to communities, from workplaces to institutions. Without such cultural shifts, rights established in one generation risk to be questioned or withdrawn within the next. We would have loved to address all the social spaces today, but because of time restraints, we had to narrow down our focus to the workplace, which is considered by many sociologists as one of the most important social places for adulthood. Workplaces are not just economic productivity. They are places of help that help us to be involved, to contribute to society, to be involved with others. They shape how we think, how we feel, and they will shape also how we feel valued, how we feel heard, and how we relate to one another. And there are spaces where people experience exclusion or belonging. There are places where people will experience either competition or collaboration, division or unity. And yet, for most women, those workplaces have been designed without their realities in mind.
And with all this in mind, we're going to explore some questions today, and we're so happy to be joined by an excellent panel of speakers who will offer initial remarks, followed by a facilitated conversation. And then we will conclude with an open discussion with our audience and our panelists. So our first speaker is Gillian Unsworth. She's the Deputy Director of the Women's Equality Division for the UK Government Office for Equalities and Opportunities. Her role is to support the Minister for Women and Equalities in designing and delivering policy interventions to break down barriers that particularly affect women's ability to thrive in all areas of life. Engagement with civil society is also a crucial element of this work, and Gillian and her team use the insight they offer to shape interventions and have real-world impact. I'd like to pass over to Gillian.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, my first challenge I've also already succeeded in. CSW creates a lot of microphone-related anxiety for me, so I've made it work first time. So thank you also for providing a really great AV system. And thank you to everybody who's battled through the rain and the roadworks to get here, and to everybody who's dialed in online. I can guarantee that New York is not feeling as glamorous as it usually does at this point in the week. I jumped at the chance to speak at this because this has been the kind of work I've been looking at over the past 10 years. I have been focusing mainly on gender pay gap reporting, but also how we go beyond gender pay gap reporting to actually deliver change in the workplace. And I was originally drawn to gender pay gap reporting, which is one of the UK government's, or was at the time, a flagship policy to tackle gender equality in the workplace, because it's so practical and it goes beyond saying, oh, we need to do more for women in the workplace. And it's like, well, what is that more? What do we need to do? And so over the past almost a decade, I've been looking at the causes. Why do we have a gender pay gap? And every country around the world has that. I've been focused on the UK, but a lot of you will recognise the challenges that every woman faces around the world. So we did some analysis about 10 years ago. We are waiting, drumroll, for updated analysis, but I know it's not going to have changed dramatically. We know that one of the causes is that industrial segregation. So women are more likely to work in sectors that pay less. We also know there's professional segregation. Women are more likely to do the less well-paid jobs. So if you do get a woman working in a tech company, she's more likely to be in an administrative or human resources role. We also know there's sexism and discrimination in the workplace, which does still account for challenges. And some of that is conscious, some of that is unconscious, but we can't ignore it. By far, though, the biggest challenge to women earning the same as men is the time we spend in the workplace. Women are more likely to be pushed out of the workplace because the workplace just doesn't work for people who have caring responsibilities, and women predominantly take on caring responsibilities. So that is where we've been focusing our efforts, is how we make sure that women have access to the workplace in the same way that men do. And so, as I say, the immediate causes are that women take on most of the unpaid care leave. The vast majority of couples in the UK are opposite sex couples. The man tends to be a couple of years older than the woman, and so a little bit more advanced in his career when they start to think about having kids. And so it makes sense, doesn't it, for the woman to take the majority of the parental leave, and for when we realise that we can't juggle both people working full-time and caring, oh, well, she'll do part-time. And then we get to that point where, which is delightfully called sandwich caring. Unfortunately, it doesn't involve snacks, but it's when the kids are getting a little bit older, but then older parents start to need a little bit more care. And so, well, you're already working part-time, aren't you, darling? You can help look after my mom. And so the woman just gets caught in this cycle of taking on more and more unpaid care. Her career takes a step back where the man continues to push on. And we know that men who have kids are more likely to earn more than their counterparts that don't have kids, which demonstrates that this is, women are losing out in two different ways, which is really frustrating. But we kind of accept this and internalize this. It doesn't have to be this way. Throughout history, if you read a history of the UK, that's what I know best, but I'm pretty confident around the world it's the same. Men and women have always had to go out to work. It was just in sort of the mid 20th century in the UK, around the 1950s, where it was the post-war years in the UK after the Second World War, where men were short on work. Women had had the audacity to work actively within the workplace, but there was a concern that men returning from the war needed jobs to give them value. And so this culture of the man going out to work in the morning, the woman staying at home and looking after the kids became the norm, and that was actively promoted and projected. But the world has moved on since then. I would love to be the kind of person who can stay at home and look after the house while I send my husband out to work, but I've only got 3 cats to look after, and we can't live in London on one person's wage. So it just doesn't work. And that is the reality for most people, is that one wage will not support a couple, never mind a family. But the workplace hasn't moved since then. We still have this basic, you work preferably in the office, preferably 9 to 5. And if you need more time, then you extend the day, or you have technology so that you can answer emails in the morning and night and whenever. And it tends to be the humans that soak up all of the additional demands. And we don't ask ourselves, why do we make all these assumptions of how we should work and how the office should work and how people should interact with it. And when we're looking at because there's a wide recognition that women on average earn less than men, but when we're looking at how to fix that, everybody's looking at the women and going, well, she needs to be more assertive, doesn't she? Chuck her on some leadership training. But that not only doesn't create a sustainable issue, that's just one person going on a leadership training, being more assertive. We also know that the cultural circumstances mean that if a woman is more assertive, she's assumed to be aggressive or pushy. And so all of these cultural factors defeat the fixing of these poor broken women. But we're not broken. We all know we're not broken. We don't need fixing. So what we should focus on, and what I have been focusing on in my work for the past decade or so, is looking at the systems and processes within the workplace so that we can tackle those, change those, so it creates that environment that enables women to succeed. And the reality is that if we fix the systems and processes, it also enables everyone to succeed. So men who are, let's face it, not having the greatest time at work either, and anybody who's underrepresented in those different professions, those different jobs. And so it becomes, instead of this vicious cycle, a virtuous cycle, ideally. That's my utopia I'm aiming for. So what I've been doing, and so as I said, I was around for the launch of the gender pay gap reporting requirements in the UK, which put numbers on the gender pay gap. We've had figures in the UK since 1997 around how, on average, men and women earn different in the UK. But from 2017, we introduced the requirement for all large employers to publish their gender pay gaps. And this wasn't an operation in creating more statistics. The point of this was to enable employers to look at the numbers within their companies, relate those to people, and try to work out what the problems were. So we provided guidance, first of all, on the calculations. It's amazing how many companies don't know the difference between mean and median, but also looking at their data and saying, right, so I've got this many women in the company, this many men in the company, but the women tend to be in the lower paid jobs. The men are the ones that shoot up to the top. Why is that? And it gave them a map to look at where the pinch points were. Where were women getting stuck in their organisation? Were there any women in their organisation? Are they getting stuck at the entry point? And so we gave them that map to enable them to see where the problems were. And we made progress. We, after 5 years, did an analysis of reporting, and it demonstrated that making those figures public made companies accountable. And you can go onto our site, you can see live data. In fact, it's shooting up at the moment because the deadlines are approaching for this year's reporting. And you can see what companies' pay gaps are. You can see how they've changed over years. And most importantly, they're attached to a senior member of staff's name. So there is somebody on the board whose name is on that report, and it makes them accountable. And we did some analysis of independent research around reporting, and it demonstrated that it has had an impact and it has contributed to the continual reduction of the gender pay gap over the past 10 years. However, our minister's not happy with that. They want to push this faster and further. And we recognise that one of the problems is that businesses go, well, we just can't attract women because they don't want to come to they don't like our jobs, they don't like our company. Or, well, women just don't want to get into the higher jobs, or they don't want to travel, and all of these sort of, I don't know what to do scenarios. So we're setting out to tell them what to do. From next year, it's going to be a legal requirement for employers in the UK to publish an action plan to show what they're doing to close the gender pay gap, and also to support women who are suffering from menopause symptoms in the workplace, because we recognise that that's another huge loss of women in the workplace. At that wonderful sandwich caring age, women also get the additional joy of having menopausal symptoms, which for too long have been misunderstood and become a real taboo. And we're really lucky in the UK because we push forward, and it's very much a live conversation. But just knowing that it's a problem isn't good enough. We need to give employers the tools to assist women who are still very talented, have got a lifetime of experience, huge asset to the workplace, but drop out because of menopausal symptoms. And so we have come up with a list of 18 actions. Employers have got to select at least 2, but we encourage them to do more. And they will be publishing those alongside their gender pay gap figures each year. And we are encouraging them to review those actions as well, so that they go around in a 3-year cycle, reviewing the effectiveness and saying that publicly, how effective they are. We've just launched those actions. They are live on our website, so you can have a look at them now, because we're encouraging employers to do that on a voluntary basis this year. So that they can work up to that. And so from April this year, they will have the opportunity to do that and to get into practice and to show off the great work that some employers are doing and encourage others to do more. So in conclusion, because I could go on, and I don't want to take up all of my Q&A time and the time of the other great speakers. What we're doing in the UK is to focus on the processes, changing workplace culture, changing systems, because that's the only way to make sure that the change that we deliver will actually last. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think what you've shared about systems are so at the root of what we're trying to address right now in the workplace. And we will go to our next panelist, who will talk about her work as a CEO, of a company. So this is Mary Darling. She is the co-founder of WestWind Pictures and an award-winning director and producer known for telling emotional resonant stories that fosters connection across cultures. She's best known for the groundbreaking series Little Mosque on the Prairie. Yes, it's her. She's been her show has been in over 80 countries. And it's challenging stereotypes with humor and heart, you know. And for decades, Mary has used her leading position to champion the diversity of women's voices and stories to build bridges between communities. So it's going to be interesting to hear you after what we've heard from you to hear about the pay gap, things like this that can decision-making that can be done in the workplace.
Thank you, Gillian, because what you talk about, I think, leads well into what I'd like to contribute, and primarily because we're a smallish production company in Canada, and so we have the ability to experiment and to play a little bit and to learn along the way about what we can try to do to bring justice into the workplace. And when I was thinking about this as a filmmaker, one of the things that really struck me that I recalled is a few years ago when I was making a documentary, I interviewed a police officer. And this police officer, I asked him, why did you decide to become a police officer? And he said, well, as a kid, I was in an organization and I found myself subjected to what he felt like was injustice. He was bullied and he decided, when I grow up, I'm going to be a cop so that I can actually affect justice. So he said when he got into the field of being a police officer, he realized that so much of what he was experiencing or was uncovered is that being a police officer was sort of adhering to a code of rights, enforcing rights. And he thought there must be something more when it comes to justice. Knowing that obviously enforcement of rights and freedoms is important, but seeking something greater that could potentially change society. That's what he was looking for. And he wasn't finding it in the police force. And that really stayed with me because in the Baha'i writings, there's a quote, which I think was mentioned in the opening, that the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. And of course, men, meaning all of us, humanity. Justice in this sense goes well beyond what Officer Courtemanche was trying to address. It goes beyond enforcing rules or laws. It creates conditions where unity can really flourish. And to think about that in our own institutions, our own companies, when we're trying to affect change, I think is incredibly important. So thinking about justice as more than just what we're doing, what are the rules we're following, and we hope that something will emerge, but thinking about it more as a spiritual principle that has social resonance in a workplace. It's very practical, really. And I'm telling you, nowhere could be more fraught with kind of the challenges that we're talking about today than a film set. A film set is a community that comes together often for a short term. People come sometimes seeking credit, wanting to make their name known, just all of these barriers that get in the way to actually doing what we're trying to do. Who speaks in those spaces, who makes the decision in those spaces, who contributes, it's recognized. And I think if we don't recognize where these conversations are happening, I think we see the effect of what shows up on screens. I think the culture that we set up behind the camera actually affects the success of what we're seeing on screen. So in my own experience, these conversations about justice need to move beyond theory and into practice, which is what Gillian is doing. So thank you. So I wanted to share a couple of experiences and try to base them around how I've been thinking about or being guided in my own thinking around justice and equity in the workplace. And I'll frame those with principle, consultation, and experimentation. So in this case, I think the principle is paramount in the importance of justice, keeping in mind the way I think about it, that justice should bring about the appearance of unity. So years ago, I wanted to share, we were working on a large series, lots of unions, stakeholders involved in it. And we had two actors who were actually being paid differently, gender pay gap. One was a woman acting as a lead character. The other was a man acting as a lead character. And when you go through negotiations with agents and people of power, you see that, things are assessed based on experience, how much they've done in the past, if their theater career comes into their film career, this kind of thing. Anyway, we ended up locking in a contract in our first year where our female character was paid substantially less. And that was with a lot of negotiation with unions and the rest of it. When that female actor simply proved that she had every capacity and capability that our other lead had, we decided on our own, going against the idea of the unions, to jump her up to be in the same range as our male actor. Agents can be very hard-nosed and very difficult to work with, but when I called her agent to let her know that we were giving her a significant jump in her salary, the agent actually cried. If anybody's ever worked in theater or in television or film, you know that agents don't cry easily. So it was a really big deal. And also for the actor, who we didn't give her any heads up that was going to happen. So she was very pleased. But I really had to think about these inequities and inequalities are often not intentional. They actually can just come from embedded or habits that are inherited. And in our industry, there's sort of no, if you don't ask for something, you don't get it. And so, if people aren't advocating or seeming to advocate or just asking for the moon, they may not get it. So it's not like, I admire what some other organizations have in terms of structure. This is really kind of a different thing. So a basic element to justice, I think, is this idea of caring, of being conscious and concerned about the rights of people who are in our workplaces, and being willing to examine and just do things differently than the structures allow. So I think change happens sometimes when somebody just gets in there and makes change. The second idea I wanted to share is just the role of consultation in a workplace. And how decisions are made. And I think this is really where justice moves beyond this idea of rights and further toward a broader definition of justice and unity. Years back, I tried to introduce consultation on a set. We had a group of writers. We were moving into season 2 of a show. It was quite a large show. And we wanted our writers, we were expanding our writing department, to meet with our actors, because our actors had lived in the skin of these characters for a year now, and the series had launched quite largely and successfully, and we wanted those writers and actors to share what they've learned over the first year with the new writers who were coming in. And so I decided we would have a consultation. And consultation in the way that what I wanted to do is put an idea in the middle of the room and then together begin to shape something that could be better than what any one of our minds could actually come up with. And so I got everybody together. And if you don't know, in our industry, oftentimes actors think of writers as bullies. They've got all the power. They write the lines you're going to say. And writers think of actors as babies. And it's not right. It's a stereotype, but it runs through the industry. It's a really discouraging reality that with anything that you mount, you're always working with this problem. So we decided, I talked to our broadcast representative and a couple of the unions who were going to be there and a couple of funders and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have this consultation. We're going to try to build a story, build unity in this way. And our broadcast executive said, are you sure you want to try that? And I said, yeah, you'll see, it's going to be great. Because I've had experience in other situations where the consultation can work really, really well. Anyway, so, and I told our actors, the one thing they couldn't ask for is additional sets. That's a big thing. So you have a series and somebody says, now I want to have my own living room, because it makes sure that the writers are writing towards that character. So we laid down some ground rules and we started going around the circle, the writers on this end, the actors together on this end. And then things went pretty nicely with the writers. But when we hit the actors, the first actor said exactly what I asked her not to. And so we adjourned the meeting. I just said, okay, we're going to try this again another time. This has been a great experiment, but we just decided to just stop the consultation where it was, rather than address what had already been discussed previously in the room. The funny thing is that after that, as the woman leading the show, myself, I heard a rumor going around that, look at Mary Darling, she can't even make a decision without consulting everybody. And my husband and I had a uncomfortable laugh at home because my husband is also a partner in the company. And I said, the irony is that if Clark had brought that idea forward, people would have said things like, that's visionary leadership. Yeah. Or look at how inclusive he is, or what a great listener. He's so forward thinking. So we knew in the moment that the issue wasn't just, the idea that I was trying to present. It was really experiences that can reveal how workplaces are shaped by assumptions about authority and gender. The good news is we did try that again later. It did go well. We actually did manage to, I think, elevate the series through sticking to our guns. I saw a similar dynamic again on the latest film that we did. It's a film called Cast Aside the Clouds, which is interesting in that it's a female protagonist, and the idea of casting aside the clouds is sort of removing the veils before our faces, removing layers of ignorance. And we ended up working with a service producer. So in other words, you inherit a production unit that you don't know necessarily. You're interviewing people as you go and you think, okay, we'll keep this person because they seem to really bring a lot. But I realized that the culture of that service production unit was very male driven. All of the keys were male. All of the people really doing the work were women. And during production meetings where we sit up at a table exactly like this and we hear from everybody, women would hesitate to bring forward ideas and frustrations that they were dealing with in their workplace, requiring me to do separate meetings with women just to be able to learn how we could keep the process moving forward. And again, I think it was very much steeped in a cultural understanding. And I say that because I think that sometimes the systems of inequality are really subtle. And that when you're swimming in those waters, which have become normalized, you don't even recognize that you're swimming amongst just your own constraints or imposed constraints on people's behavior. So to that unit, that seemed totally normal. But we set about to make a change, and it was interesting. One of the things that we did at the beginning of every meeting in this particular situation, because we identified something that was getting in the way of unity and justice, and that was we opened every single production meeting by talking about backbiting and gossip. Unless you're really busy on a set, like as a director or producer, or you're sitting at the camera, you're working with the camera department, it's a really boring place to be. Perhaps the most boring workplace you could be at. And so people they're stressed and they're frustrated and they have time on their hands. And so often the culture on set, and people know this, anybody who's worked in the industry knows, that it becomes a place where people start talking about each other, which deteriorates trust, which I think is a major building block towards justice. And I think what Gillian is doing in her example is building trust with these organizations that really can help elevate and create accountability. Putting somebody's name on a page means everything. So trust is needed in the pursuit of justice in order for unity to emerge. And that's not a fast policy thing, you know, that's something that's proven out. So this crew experienced this huge drop in just conversations. They called each other to account when something would come up where they were talking about somebody else. They brought problems to the production group so that we could make decisions together. So when consultation is really practiced well, you can kind of intercept those small signals that you're seeing in a workplace and begin to introduce something new to be a little bit of a disruptor. So, you know, the fact that we identified backbiting as one of the greater barriers towards building justice in our workplace was we just stayed on that path. And in the outcome of our latest project, where we really had to practice that very hard, ended up being very good. In fact, at the wrap party, people didn't want to leave. They didn't want to go on to new productions. They wanted to figure out how they could bring some of these policies and norms into the next workplace. And then the third idea, and I think because we're an entrepreneurial company, we're a husband and wife team, we bring in crews and different workers. The third idea is experimentation. And, you know, not being afraid to make a few mistakes along the way, to bumble along, you know, to have somebody backbite about me about not being able to make a decision to save my life, I thought was very interesting in that regard. But it's a long process, you know, change doesn't happen all at once. And it requires, I think, some courage or just the ability to have a little bit of egg on your face. The pay decision, the pay equity decision was one kind of experiment, you know, sort of taking and aligning this idea of policy with principle. The consultation was another. How do leadership practices interact? But in this last film that we did, Cast Aside the Clouds, a film that is really exploring how individuals confront entrenched prejudices, how they gradually discover new ways of seeking truth for themselves and thinking independently. And anyway, I think in so many ways, this mirrors what we're talking about this morning, because we do need to think for ourselves. We do need to see through our own eyes and not just adopt what we think is the social norm of the day, or we'll be stuck on this sort of hamster wheel forever. So taking these chances, and if our goal of justice is really to build and maintain unity, then workplaces become like laboratories. And so again, I love what you've said, because I think that that's what that's asking these individuals to think about is how do things actually change? Sometimes they change because you just change them. You make a mistake. There's some blowback from that, but you make, and then you adjust. So as we make decisions about pay or participation or leadership, that might seem like little small incremental moments in our own production unit or work, but those workplaces really do become, they really can affect a change in culture. You know, and we used to tease, you know, WestWind Pictures changing the culture of film and television one series at a time or one show at a time. That's overstating things. It's not that easy. You know, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. I think when workplaces strive to align principle with practice and cultivate consultation beyond just having a conversation, but really thinking about who are the people at the table? How do those voices get heard? If it's difficult for a woman to speak out in a group like this, then how are opportunities given for her to speak out and learn the power of her own voice? We begin to understand in these kinds of groups that culture matters, like the culture that we set up as individuals really matters. So being open to continuing experimentation is important. So I think it just reminds us that justice isn't something reserved for courts or institutions or simply for policymakers, but it really is a prerequisite to true unity, and that how we act in the spaces that we're in really matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's really wonderful to hear these concrete examples of steps taken within workplaces that are serving to actively transform the systems and structures that are producing these inequalities, and also the cultures and the relationships that shape the environment that can often further entrench these injustices as well. So thank you so much, such a valuable contribution. And with that in mind, I'm really excited to pass on to our next speaker, Alison Marshall. Alison is the CEO of Age International and a member of the Age UK Senior Leadership Team. She leads Age International's work on the needs and rights of older people across law and middle-income countries, overseeing governance, advocacy, fundraising, communications, programme funding, and humanitarian work. With over 25 years in international development, Alison has had senior roles at UNICEF UK, the CAFOD, Bond, Sense International, and IPPF, traveling extensively to support human rights work worldwide. Really excited to pass on to you, Alison.
Thank you so much, Shada. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all. It's a real privilege and honour to be here this morning. So for me, justice in the workplace is grounded in the implementation of human rights at work, while also recognising the intrinsic humanity of all workers. So I really recognise Mary's point that justice goes beyond rights, and I loved your examples. But at this time of a pushback against rights, I'd really like to remind us of the agreed foundations of the human rights framework, which gives us all a common reference point to integrate fairness and rights into the structural, the behavioural, and the emotional fabric of our organisations, so that everybody can feel safe and valued and empowered. And just to note, for the purposes of this morning's discussion, I'm going to be really talking about paid work, rather than speaking to the need to value all of women's unpaid work properly. So I'm going to outline 4 pillars of organisational justice, look at intersectionality and the human rights conventions which underpin justice at work. So the 4 pillars of organisational justice are distributive, procedural, interpersonal, and informational. So distributive, meaning fairness in the distribution of reward, promotion, pay, workload. That's about outcomes being proportional to contributions, often based on equity or need. Procedural, being about fairness in processes, the procedures used to make decisions. So that's about consistency, lack of bias, accuracy, and enabling employees to have a voice and to appeal decisions. Interpersonal is about fairness of treatment. So how are workers treated, especially in dignity and courtesy and respect. And informational is about fairness in communications. So this is about the truthfulness of information that is shared with employees about decisions and involves explaining the rationale behind actions in a timely and open manner. So recognizing also that these actions are easier in a formal workplace rather than the informal workplaces in which many women find themselves. So how do those 4 pillars apply to gender and women and the other intersecting characteristics and challenges that women face? So we all know, here we are at the CSW, we all know that gender is a really important dimension of discrimination, but just one dimension of discrimination. So we've heard about the gender pay gap, fantastic work, but what about the disability pay gap? Because a woman may be a woman and a disabled person. What about discrimination against women from racialized and minoritized backgrounds at work? What about women facing domestic violence? And age. Older women, especially those with these other intersecting protected characteristics, face multiple forms of discrimination in the workplace. And we live in a rapidly aging world. So by 2050, which is really not that far away now, the proportion of the world's population over 60 will have doubled to being 1 in 5. And yet ageism is rife. The World Health Organization did a global report on ageism in 2021, and with data from 57 countries, concluded that 1 in 2 of us are ageist against older people. So it's great to be talking about justice at work today, but of course it's not a new concept. Here we are at the UN, so let's look at 3 of the central human rights conventions and the guidance that they provide to member states and to all of us in relation to justice for women in the workplace. Let's go back to the future, back to 1948 and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That talks in Article 23 about fair and favourable conditions. Everyone has the right to work, to a free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions, to protection against unemployment. And it also talks about equal pay for equal work. Remember that slogan? Justice in the workplace mandates that without any discrimination, everyone has that right to equal pay for equal work. And the same article also talks about the right to form and join trades unions to safeguard workers' interests. And there's an article as well addressing dignity and living standards so that workers have the right to just and favourable remuneration, ensuring an existence worthy of human dignity, both for themselves and for their families. And there's protection against discrimination and exploitation. So there's a lot already in there from 1948 that we find very relevant still today. And we're here at CSW, so there's CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Article 11, equal employment rights. Women must have the same employment rights as men, including the right to work, promotion, job security, and benefits. There's equal remuneration again. There's protection of maternity and health. So a prohibition against dismissal due to pregnancy or maternity leave, provision of paid leave, and protection of women from harmful working conditions. There's the article about elimination of harassment in workplaces. And the CEDAW committee in its general recommendation also talks about tackling the structural barriers and the systemic inequalities that prevent women from accessing, remaining in, and progressing in decent work. And of course, CEDAW compels signatory member states to implement these standards through legislation and through policy so that women can claim their rights and also receive remedies for violations. So there's a lot in CEDAW. And more recently, we have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So again, we have equal access to employment, prohibition of discrimination, that's Article 27, reasonable accommodations about providing adaptations to the work environment to enable employees with disabilities to perform their jobs, and support for employment, vocational training, and career advancement. And again, Article 13 says that if these rights are denied, persons with disabilities can seek remedies to protect their rights. So there's an awful lot there already that we can refer back to and ground ourselves in. But coming back to ageism in the workplace, and since this event is about the UK and about Canada, let's just look at a few statistics. So in Canada, in a survey by Women of Influence in 2024, they found that 75% of women reported experience of age-based stereotypes or assumptions in the workplace. Half the respondents reported unfair treatment in promotion, and half of them experienced a lack of respect from colleagues. Turning to the UK, nearly half of all UK adults claim to have experienced some form of workplace-based discrimination, with ageism being the most prevalent. 1 in 3 people over 50 believe they've been turned down for a job because of their age, and 77% of workers over 51 believe ageism is impacting their employment status. And menopause was mentioned. In a 2024 survey revealed that in the UK, 69% of people believe that women face discrimination at work due to menopause. And data from the Fawcett Society shows that 1 in 10 women who worked through the menopause left their jobs due to the symptoms, with 8 in 10 saying they lack support from employers. So clearly these rights are not operating as they should be. But nonetheless, I still have a belief that they provide us with this common reference point. And that's why in our rapidly aging world, we need a new United Nations Convention on the rights of older persons. This is a key piece of the human rights jigsaw of protection. And finally, after 14 years of negotiation here at the UN in New York, drafting of this new convention is starting in Geneva at the Human Rights Council this year. And what might a new convention on the rights of older persons mean in practice? Well, just one example. Both the UK and Canada, thankfully, abolished mandatory retirement age a while ago, but most countries across the world still have an age limit which forces workers to retire regardless of their performance in the role. So that's something, that age-based discrimination would be addressed by a new convention. So to wrap up and to conclude, I would like to call on the governments of Canada, the UK, and all of us to champion a new convention on the rights of older persons, as I believe this would really promote justice in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's, yeah, the historical perspective that you have brought in order for us to have a unity of vision is so important. And yeah, for the next steps to take, we need to know where we come from, what has been gained, and what is the kind of common ground that we have all accepted, signed for as a moral contract as humanity. And then remind ourselves, what is this moral contract that we have taken? And what are the gaps? Where can we make this more inclusive, make sure that no one is forgotten? So the next panelist is Tamara Thermitus. I have met her, and maybe I didn't say well your name. You have to correct me. Okay. We have met this in fact 2 days ago, and it was really a surprise to meet and speak with her and learn about all her work, her 30 years of work as a lawyer in Canada. She is a distinctive lawyer. She is lawyer emeritus and distinguished Bolton Senior Fellow at McGill University's Faculty of Law. And I decided to invite her to the panel yesterday. So, and she accepted to do so. So I thank her so much for that willingness and courage to be here with us. And
to be honest, it's more like craziness.
Also, there's a degree of that for sure. And Tamara has led leader roles within Justice Canada, the Bar of Quebec, and the federal government, notably serving as the chief negotiator for the federal government of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Throughout her impressive career, she has contributed extensively to legal work on discrimination and reconciliation as a leading advocate for racial justice, equity, and reconciliation, contributing significantly to legal work on discrimination and social justice. She's also a prolific writer, and her work on racism, gender issues, and intersectionality are guided by a deep moral compass and a thirst for justice. So Tamara, I invite you to share.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, and maybe we'll see if I'm too crazy. So, so talking about that, listen to you, Mary, and listen to you, Gillian. I guess that we're talking about justice as a concept, but also justice as a reality. And, you know, we have to acknowledge the fact that in the books, the situation is great with the question of like aging people for sure. But when you look at in the book, we have like a lot of law, a lot of policies. We have like, and Dudu when he came in Canada said, you know, the strategy that Canada have, like the book, the policy, it's great, but there's no intellectual strategy to put it in place. And it comes, and I'm not following my text, I will go back to it. It comes to the who's judging, and because that's a real question, who's having the power and who's judging? Because if the law are great, who are responsible to apply those laws? And what are their understanding of social context? So without a good understanding of social context, and I went to a few conferences this week, and they say, we need parity of gender on the bench, for example, or in conseil d'administration.
Administrative council.
The conseil d'administration en français. Translate. Boards. So we need parity on boards. But the reality, what do we really need? It's people who understand the social context, people who understand discrimination, people who understand that to be an aging person have some limit. And the law cannot do that, the judge has to do it. And to have like parity, and we have to be honest among ourselves, to have parity when on a board or on a judicial system, it's one thing. But who are those people and what are their understanding of the issue? And if you don't understand the issue, you become a poster child. And the system won't change because they will take Tamara Thermitus to put on the board, they will take Mary Darling to put on the board, and Mary Darling is a product of the system. She's going to reproduce the system because system usually what they do, they take that people who are like following the rule to make sure that and when you look at the justice system, it's based on precedent. So when those precedents were like created, there was not a lot of indigenous people around the table. There was not a lot of women around the table, and there were not a lot of Black people around the table. So the notion of precedent has also a limit to which extent the law can answer the questions. Right. So going to my text now. So what do we mean by justice? And I don't know if I'm going to stick to my text because I think that I made the point. Yeah, and I think the point is made, and listening to, for me also, when I listen to women, I'm a woman. And, years ago, somebody, there was like, wait, it was when Obama was becoming president. And I was in a meeting with women and they said, and they were like, we were in Quebec. So those discussions was like theoretical discussion. And they say, as a Black woman, you should vote for Hillary. Because Hillary is a woman and you're a woman first. I was like kind of puzzled because my life as a woman is my life as a Black woman. I cannot separate myself in 2 or 3 or 7 parts. I've been discriminated as a woman, I've been discriminated as a Black person, and I'm sitting in an intersectional position. So when Gillian speak about the way women are like when we speak with authoritative stance, the way we're qualified, it's worse for Black women, because we're not supposed to speak. You're not supposed to lead. You're supposed to be like serving. And when you know that, is that we have to understand what is intersectionality and deeply understand what it is. It's not only like a word or a buzzword because it's intersectionality, and also we have to understand who creates intersectionality. And sometimes we forgot what is the contribution of the Black woman in the human rights conversation. Because intersectionality was developed by 2 Black women, Collins and Crenshaw. And those 2 Black women, they explain intersectionality as something like you're put in an intersection and your reality is totally different. And trying to dissect me is violated my right. Again. So I think it's important to look at this, the notion of intersectionality, and to frame it as it has to be. And law in the books are not law in action. And we have to make sure that law in action, that like moving the needle for organizational culture, but this work is a work that we need a framework, like the ecological framework that has been developed by an institute. I did not develop it. It's an institute that I collaborate with, Diversity Institute. They put it in the diversity. So they took a framework that exists and they adapted to diversity. So when we're talking about ecological framework in a diversity setting, we're looking at the individual component, the organizational component, talking about corporation, workplace, and social component. All those components are acting together. There's a relationship between all of them. It's moving. And we have to understand those conversations. And sometimes we say that, oh, it is, and I think you said it, it is something that, comment on dit en anglais, c'est unconscious.
Unconscious.
Is it? Question. I don't know. Is it unconscious or is it unpacked? Should we unpack what we see? And we were talking about critical approach, and you're talking about the critical approach. But I think that, critical race theory gave us tools. And when we talk about lived experience, it's something that was developed in critical race theory too. The lived experience of the person, and lived experience give us access to another interpretation of reality. And it gives us also, it forces us to address the notion of epistemic injustice. Epistemic injustice is when the voice of women are not listened to. But when you're discriminated as a woman, you are the specialist of that discrimination because you can explain it. You understand what it means, and you are the specialist. But sometimes law and systems just shut you down. You cannot talk about it. So that's epistemic injustice, that the testimonial aspect of it. And when you look at epistemic injustice, you also look at the hermeneutical aspect of it. And that the fact that you're not able to explain what's happening to you, the fact that you have no testimony, so there's no historical understanding of what's happened to you, make that you don't understand your own life and you don't understand your own trauma. So that kind of injustice, by silencing people, is very important for workplace and for society. Because when we talk about workplace, let's be honest, we're talking about a micro system that is embedded in the bigger system, just like the ecological model. So I think it's also important to look at this in that fashion. I won't read my note. Sorry. I will take a look at them. And I want to talk about the boys club. And I think that, nobody talks about it. It's a kind of the elephant in the room. And currently we are living in a situation that the boys club want to rehab their rights.
Yeah, that's true.
And we have something that we won't speak about because it would take it would be a conference of the UN on its own. The fact that some guys that we all know because the Justice Department opened its file all over the world have done some real abuse of women that we don't talk about. And that's part of, workplace also. How can those guys have done that for years? Not for days, for years. And we're not talking about it in the UK. Some movement has been done, really solid movement. But we have to understand not only what they have done, but how they were able to do it. Because that talk about system, and we have to understand system to dismantle them. Because if we don't understand those systems, and we have to voice our voice as women to say, no, those act as we try to be in the workplace and the decision table, and we see those things happen, not in a petty way, but in a major way for years. It's something that we have to think about in the global level of what is boys club and what are the effects of those boys clubs. So I thought about the importance of critical thinking. And when we talk about critical race theory, there's also a say that race or racism is not something abnormal, just like gender bias is not abnormal. It's part of the system. The system are built with that in mind. Because as you know, women have the right to vote, like at the end of, depending on the country that you look at. But, 200 years, like a big, what's that? So let's say that, the whole system were not constructed for them. For us, I mean, they're constructed for like the majority. It's the same like for indigenous people. It's the same for Black people or racialized people. So we have to deconstruct those systems and take them into account. And we have to go beyond 1948, because when you look at it, it's 1948, almost 80 years. And we still have those discussions, because what are we talking about? We're talking about power. And we want power, and the reality is that we don't have enough power to change the law. And some people, and when we see representation, and it's not for all women who are part of the representation, but there's also instrumentalization of representation. So we have to be aware of that and took people and then go back to the moral compass that you were talking about. We have to go to the principle, because justice is also peace. Currently, we're not living in peace at all. And the goal is to try to give legs to those conventions. Because another convention could be nice on paper, and some people will say to you, you have those conventions, why are you complaining? Yeah. But I think that's not enough. So we have to put leg in those conventions to put people in position of power who understand sociology, the social contract, history, because we want to erase history. By erasing history, we are deleting, control, delete part of our life, and we won't understand the one who can qualify as the other, and it will be easier to keep them in the margin. So that was not my speech.
Well, just I could ask you about, you were telling me about this micro and macro type of justice, an example.
Preparation, but it's not in my speech, but I will do that. But I just want to, I think that there's there's a triad quote anyway, but I think that Simone de Beauvoir has to be quoted today. She said, never forget that it's only take one political or economic or religious crisis for women's rights to be put in jeopardy. Those rights are never to be taken for granted. We must be made vigilant throughout our lives. And I will quote Malcolm X, which not a woman, but he's speaking about women, so that's okay. The most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected woman in America is the Black woman. And the most neglected person in America is the Black woman. Malcolm X, 1963. So to respond to your question with respect to justice, because you said that I've done a negotiation, you said it's a fact, I negotiate the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And currently I'm discussing with writing a paper with a colleague, because when you look at Truth and Reconciliation, which was part of a settlement of Indian residential school, where students were put in school under like a colonial policy to make sure that they adhere to the Canadian quote unquote value. So it's in a nutshell, it was like something more national. So now the question becomes, and that's my friend who is working with me, and I forgot his name because it was not on my list, but anyway, I'm gonna find it. Martha Erdman, who's a law professor at Maryland University, she said, okay, we are not in the space of talking about reparation in the global scheme, because there's some public resistance by government that I don't have to go deep to that. So the question becomes, how can we community do reparation? So she in Washington, DC, she's working on like a micro project where people know the history of the neighborhood there where they live. And some people have made some gesture, because the area where she lived was a former Black area that become white, because of the application of like the GI Bill and other government policy that structures city and structural neighborhoods. And through the discussion and community discussion, some people will make some gesture, and not charitable gesture, but as a recognition of what they gain from those policy, they will pay part or totally the total mortgage of Black people by recognizing that they had an advantage and that the policy gave them an advantage. So those community conversation can bring, by understanding history, by making education, but education about what's happening on the ground, can make people say, that's really unfair. So I will share my wealth with you because I think it's fairer. So it's not based on religion or legal analysis. It's based on unjust enrichment. So that's the notion that underneath it. So sorry, I didn't read my speech. I should not have done one.
Thank you so much,
Tamara. For your time.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. But I mean, let's clap her first. Thank you so much. No, I think it's really a great talk that you've given, and also a great point about what community can do for justice in terms of reparation. This is a concrete example of a community deciding to kind of repair the injustice gap.
The wrong,
yeah, the wrongs that have been done, and offer this way. How do you say? This wage, une hypothèque?
I just said, a mortgage.
Yeah, this mortgage for people who can't afford it, but they can afford it because of historically.
Advantage.
It's such a good reflection of how can we as community maybe offer different ways of applying justice.
And she also said that she always buy, if she has something to buy, she would check if there's somebody in the Black community who sell the goods, so to make sure that the distribution, as you were saying. So it's like, that's the idea underneath it. And I just forgot about, I'm working with DI, and DI is doing some work that is apparent, like concurring with what you're doing. So we have like situation of women in Canada that we just delivered, situation of Black community, women in construction. We have like some data showing that with we have like less than we have like 25% of women coming out from school that are like engineering school, 25%, but when you go underground, it's only 8% of them that working. So I will send you the information about the Diversity Institute. There's like a lot of report, like Canada-based journey, but then we're also currently doing a report international with the Forum for People of African Descent. And we're looking at the representation of Black women on board in 10 different countries. So we're like working on that too. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I have done what I could.
It's wonderful. And yes, I think it's very interesting, the Diversity Institute. We will for sure look at it.
I will send you the information.
Thank you so much, Tamara. So our final panelist is Zarin Hainsworth. Zarin founded her family business, Zarin Communications, in 1997. It's a people empowerment social enterprise focusing on realizing the potential of individuals within organizations and specializing in supporting initiatives that increase women's empowerment. In this capacity, Zarin works with UN agencies, government departments, multinationals, and small charities. Appointed as an officer of the Order of the British Empire for her work on women's rights, she chairs Widows' Rights International and the UK Civil Society's Women's Alliance. Zarin is also a UN Women UK company member, vice president of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women in Geneva, and founder of the Tanzanian charity Nasarian. Hand the floor to you, Zarin.
Thank you so much. Bonjour à tous. Merci à la BSC pour l'organisation de cet événement important. Mais excusez-moi, maintenant je parle en anglais. So I won't be able to do the whole thing in French. Apologies, everybody, as this is a joint Canadian event. We've heard a bit about challenges. So we've heard about occupational segregation, low pay, discrimination, the challenge for caregivers, the gender pay gap, a little bit about the broken rung to leadership, and maternity and health needs from Gillian and Alison. We didn't mention workplace flexibility or the lack of representation in STEM and tech. there was something about structural inequality, and just an ILO stat from 2024 that out of the potentially employed population, 46.4% of women against 69.5% of men are employed. So even in, you talked about structural inequality. And according to the ILO, it'll take us 2 centuries at this rate of progress to achieve equality in the workplace. So we can see that those are some of the challenges. And this week has been very interesting for me to think about the definition of justice that everybody's been using, because in the theme, it talks about getting rid of discriminatory practices, but also about access to justice. In other words, what does that mean in terms of making sure the law is good, but then enabling women to use that law well? And, this has been looking at, I think people have mentioned about, it's not just about that element. And it's been so interesting in these different spaces that we've been in to think about the different elements of justice. So there was a youth event yesterday, and there was in sport, in algorithms, in apprenticeships, in so many different areas. And I think that's been very interesting this week to hear about these, that really people are thinking about what is the definition of justice in these different spaces. And one of the things that I was interested, I'm also trustee of Equally Ours, and there was this wonderful discussion we had about the economy. And I think it was somebody from a disability organization was talking about what kind of economy do we talk about? And it shouldn't just be about a fair economy. We're talking about an enabling economy, but also a flourishing economy. And I think that's the same thing about the workplace. One of the things that we were looking at as a trustee is some of the, because there was a grievance procedure. So, what would we do to help the staff in this charity, which is about equality, right? And one of the things that I was trying to put forward is, okay, we've got this thing about anti-racism, anti-this, anti-that, and that's important. We need to look at this. But is there something we can do more than that? Surely we should be ascribing to me, not just, stopping the things that are bad, but creating a space, an enabling space, and an environment where everybody can flourish and prosper, regardless of anything to do with your body. So really enabling our primary identity, our identity as human beings. I would say a person with a soul, but whatever you want to call it, that human essence, that thing that makes us human as opposed to a dolphin, which are very intelligent animals, by the way, or a pig, which are also intelligent. But what's the difference between other mammals and, humans? And it's this essence. So let us look beyond the secondary identity, which is everything to do with the body, where we were born, what our parents were, our education, all that stuff. Let's really find an environment in our workplace where every human being who is in that space is enabled to flourish. And one of the areas that one of the organizations it's been my privilege to work with for a number of years now is an environment called EBBF, which is Ethical Business Building the Future. And it's been a pioneering force in reshaping the global discourse on the purpose and role of business and work. It's a values-driven, learning-oriented community, and it has members from around the world. It started in Europe, and now it's huge, and it's constantly trying to translate these spiritual principles and ethical values into practical approaches in business, work, and organizational life. And the events that I've been to, which are they're both online and in person, really try to help us all, wherever we are in business, whether we're an entrepreneur or we're at the C-level or wherever we are in work, how do we take those morals and ethics and how do we put them into practice? And I think one of the things that is very interesting is this idea of the values, which some of us have mentioned: trustworthiness, truthfulness, compassion, and so forth. And one of the things that I tried to do when I set up my business in 1997, and the reason I set it up is because I couldn't get a job, because I was, my whole life I've been an entrepreneur. So when I went to become working at a till in Sainsbury's, I couldn't get a job because I had a very unorthodox CV. And when I went to the other end and got interviews as a CEO in a charity, they wanted me to give 120%. And I thought, well, I've given up my work in order to be able to look after my children. So no, that's no good. So I ended up becoming an entrepreneur again. And what I try to do is to take the ideas of these values and try to embed them into every single element our work. And one of the quotes that I think Mary also mentioned, this idea of what is justice? Justice is to see with your own eyes and not the eyes of our neighbor or the eyes of others, and to know one's own knowledge and not through the knowledge of one's neighbor. And this idea really was the basis of everything that we were trying to do in our company. So whether it was procurement, our printer used printers that didn't use chlorine. We used recycled paper in our products, in those days when we had paper products rather than everything online. How we worked with our trainers, enabling them to finding the very best solutions for them, not taking them for granted, but organizing everything really well, from not taxis to the nice hotels, so that when they weren't undermined in any way, so they could really go and do their training job really well wherever they were. With a voice for the trainers in the management of the company. We were working towards becoming like a share ownership of the company, but we didn't quite get that far before COVID. And then also in terms of the training was always looking at what is the best that we can find in research, and then what else can we add? What is a new thinking, a new idea, a spiritual idea that we can embed into the training? And it was very interesting because at the end of each training, we did one thing I like, one thing I learned, and one action I'll take as a result from all of the people who were in the room. And it was in India one time, and the guy said, it's noble. And I thought, that's really lovely. Yes, that's what we try to do, that the training, because a lot of training sets people up to fail in order to prove something. And our training didn't do that. We never set people up to fail. We always set people up to succeed. And if you also, we have a course on conflict management. And it was very interesting because many companies are set up because they think that conflict is good in the workplace, because conflict makes people work together. It produces, outcomes outside the box, et cetera, et cetera. And our view was, no, we don't want to have conflict in the workplace. What we want is all those outcomes that you get, but not through conflict. So it was very interesting trying to set up these different ways of doing things. And also we try to have justice when we work with our clients, and that's really difficult because there's a game when you're selling and you're trying to sell your product. We're very wonderful. You need to pay us a lot of money. No, you're not so good. We've got somebody else who can do the same job for less. Okay, well, we'll take a little bit less, but remember, we're really good. And you have this whole thing, and it's, consultancy is really difficult because you spend so much time in the pre and post. It's not just what you do at the time. And it's the same with training. It's not just about turning up and doing the stuff. It's all the work you do before and all the work you have to do after. And so how do you actually get proper payment? So there's a lot of injustice in work because people aren't actually paid really for their time, especially women. Or some people are paid a huge amount for not doing so much. So it's very difficult to not play that game. So we try to be honest. We try to also only take jobs with organizations that had good credentials. So we turned down many contracts which would have got us a lot of money, but with companies who, like armaments companies or aerospace companies that also made weapons that we could have made us a lot of money, but we decided not to. But I just want to say, apart from that, a few things about a couple of stories about some of the training we did and how we tried to embed values. So one of them we created a course on consultation, and we did this masterclass of it was the CEO and his top management of a company in India. And they didn't want the whole day masterclass. They could only afford time for half a day. So trying to teach consultation and get them to do it in a little bit of time. But then we were in this boardroom. It was like a boardroom like this, but small. And so there wasn't that much room. So we did the kind of presentation on consultation. And we said, okay, so take an issue you've got at the moment in your company and use this method to try to find a solution. So they all broke up into little groups, and then we did the report back afterwards. Some of them had spent all the entire time deciding what they were going to talk about, didn't get anywhere. Some of them decided, well, they didn't really have any problems. But the CEO was sitting next to his head of finance and his head of something else. And the three of them were in this group. And they said, we use this system with the problem we had, and we found a solution. And he said, now we're going to use this method in all of our decision making. And then there was another time where it was a virtual group. There were 23 people in the group, and they're in a group of an organization, and they'd never met. And so they came to the offices in Slough from all over Europe. And we had this, it was supposed to be team building. And we did this exercise, it was like a virtues exercise. We had these little cards, and everybody gets a little pack of cards, and they have to give out to everybody else in the room patience, kindness, empathy, or whatever. And then we had this exercise afterwards. And then there's this one guy, and what people tend to do is they take their cards and they put them in front of them, and they look to see how are they perceived by other people. So part of the exercise is, okay, so what did you feel when you gave these cards? And what did you feel when you received these cards? And what happens in the room, which is really interesting, is the whole dynamic changes. There's an energy, there's a buzz. It's a really interesting process. And this one guy had like loads and loads of tact and hardly anything else. I like one other thing. And afterwards he said to me, yes, I like doing this exercise, but I got a lot of tact, but I think that was a joke. And then we talked about different things about what it felt like to give, and what are the qualities you need to do this exercise. You need to have perception about what a virtue is. You need to have observation to be able to see it in others, and you need to have the ability to express when you give the card. You can't just hand them out willy-nilly. You have to say, I value honesty in you when you did X. So it's a specific action, a specific quality. Anyway, a bit later, we had to meet the same team, and this time we would do communications, I think, and I used the same exercise. And maybe I said, okay, now we're going to do the virtues exercise. This guy's like, yes. I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then we did the exercise, and then he was putting out his cards. I went to see him afterwards, and he had different cards. He just, I'm really chuffed. He said, last time I only got tact, but this time I got other qualities. And then he took out this from his pocket, this very crumpled little green piece of card, which had tact. And he said, I put this on my desk every day. He said, it was the first time anybody said anything nice to me. And I thought, and then afterwards, I was doing another training in Vienna or Zurich or somewhere. And I was having coffee, and a woman came up to me and said, oh, you might not remember me. I was in that team that you did that process with. She said, and we had this whole discussion about constructive criticism and how there's no such thing as constructive criticism. She said, after this training, we've had a completely different appraisal. We don't have constructive criticism anymore. It completely changed our lives. And for me, this idea of that when you take these values and you put them into practice, it changes so much stuff. When I first set up the company, I wanted to become one of the FTSE 100, and I wanted my training to be a kite mark for values-based training. I achieved neither, but I don't think it matters, because if you that one person's life, Sebastian, his name was, if his life was changed for the better, then everything I did was worthwhile. Or if this company in the senior management in India, if they only used it once, it's worthwhile. So I think for me, this idea of trying to put our values into work and trying to create a just environment, which is not just one that is not discriminatory, it's much more than that. And if all of us can try to do that in our own sphere of influence, then we will change the world one person at a time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zarin. Your timing is impeccable. We're just coming to the end of our session, and we'd really hope to have time to have an open discussion with our audience and our panelists, but it felt like such a shame to cut short these really valuable contributions to this discussion around the justice in the workplace. So yeah, I'm hoping we can take some time in afterwards, or I'm sure we'll see each other in spaces around. We've still got one day left of the commission, so we can maybe see each other in different spaces and have some conversations around this topic as well. So we can, it doesn't just end here; it keeps going as well. So
just before ending, we would like to thank everyone, all of you, dear panelists. Seriously, this conversation was so rich, and we could have gone for the whole day talking with you. And I would have liked to have more time so that we can have like a discussion that is more informal, but it will be maybe for next year. Let's see. So we'd like to thank you, thank the Government of Canada and the Government of UK, the translators online, Misha Evans and Hoda Gaderian, Esther Maloney, Maria Pavlou, the BIC, Estefania and Rohan. And to finish, we would like to let us leave this discussion with an open question for reflection, because there were many things said. So maybe to reflect on what small but meaningful shifts could workplaces make today towards gender equality that would signal a deeper commitment to justice and to foster belonging. Thank you so much for being here.